Sanda Robinson had been standing in the corridor for 43 minutes. The compliance audit was supposed to start at 9. It was now 9:43, and no one had come to escort her to the conference room on the 3rd floor where her files waited. The hallway was silent except for the low mechanical hum of climate control and her own breathing. Polished black stone stretched in both directions. Recessed lighting cast no shadows. There were no signs, no directories, no indication of what happened behind the seamless doors that lined the walls at precise intervals. She checked her phone again. No missed calls. No messages. Just the confirmation email from earlier that week with the address, the time, and instructions to wait in the lobby. Except the security desk downstairs had sent her here instead, to this floor, to this corridor, after a brief, quiet conversation over their headset that Sanda hadn't been meant to hear. Something was wrong. She'd known at the moment the elevator doors opened and she'd stepped into a hallway that felt less like an office building and more like a vault. Martin Tower occupied a narrow vertical slice of Chicago's skyline just west of the river, 42 floors of limestone and smoked glass that housed Magee Martin's sprawling portfolio of real estate holdings, shipping logistics, and private equity investments. On paper, it was legitimate. On record, it was clean. In practice, it was a fortress that happened to file taxes. Sanda had reviewed the contracts. Forensic financial analysis was her specialty, the kind of work that made corporations nervous and federal agencies interested. She'd been hired through a subcontractor to verify compliance on a government-adjacent deal, the kind of assignment that looked routine until you realized how many locked doors stood between you and the actual books. She was good at her job. She was used to being the only black woman in conference rooms full of men who thought intelligence was something you inherited along with your last name. She was used to being underestimated, redirected, delayed. Used to the subtle tests of patience and composure that came with every high-stakes audit. But this felt different. The corridor had no windows. No exit signs. No sense of how far she was from the elevators or whether anyone else was on this floor. Just silence and the faint sense that the building itself was aware of her, cataloging her presence, deciding what to do with her. Her phone buzzed. A text from the subcontracting firm's project manager. Running behind. Building logistics issue. Sit tight. Someone will come get you soon. Sanda read it twice. Sit tight. As if she had a choice. As if she could simply walk back to the elevator and leave without clearance, without the keycard she'd been told to surrender at the security desk, without knowing whether the doors would even open for her. She texted back. Understood. Standing by. Professional. Calm. The response of someone who didn't rattle easily, even when every instinct she had was telling her she'd been maneuvered into a space she was never supposed to enter. Around her, Martin Tower hummed with invisible activity. Somewhere above or below, business was happening. Decisions were being made. Money was moving. But here, in this corridor with its expensive emptiness and oppressive quiet, Sanda stood alone. She straightened her posture. Adjusted the strap of her leather portfolio. Checked the time again. 9:51, if no one came by 10, she'd walk back toward the elevators herself. She'd be polite. She'd be firm. She'd make it clear that her time had value even if theirs didn't. The lie felt thin even as she told it to herself. Because the truth was, she couldn't afford to walk away. Not from this contract. Not from the credibility that came with completing an audit tied to a federal subcontract. Not when she'd spent the last 6 years building a consulting practice that required her to be twice as credentialed and 3 times as patient as anyone else in the room. So she stood. And she waited. And she refused to let the silence make her smaller. Her phone didn't buzz again. At 10:04, she heard them before she saw them. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Deliberate and unhurried. The kind of sound that meant purpose, not coincidence. 2 men rounded the corner from the far end of the corridor. Both tall. both wearing dark suits tailored with the kind of precision that made them look like extensions of the building itself. One was older, pale, with close-cut blonde hair and a face that had forgotten how to soften. The other was younger, broader, with watchful eyes and a posture that suggested military training or something close to it. They stopped directly in front of her. No apology for the delay. No explanation. Just a moment of assessment that felt invasive and complete. The older man spoke first. His voice was neutral, almost courteous, but there was no question buried in his words. "Ms. Robinson. You're coming with us." Not an invitation. Not a request. An instruction. Every survival instinct Sanda had sharpened over 33 years of navigating spaces that weren't built for her suddenly flared to life. Strange men. Private floor. No witnesses. No exit. This was the moment where smart women said no. Where they demanded answers. Where they refused to follow strangers deeper into a building that had already swallowed them whole. But Sanda Robinson had also spent 33 years learning that saying no in the wrong way, at the wrong time, to the wrong people, carried consequences that lasted longer than the moment itself. So she looked at the two men. Studied their faces. Their stance. The way they stood between her and the elevators without making it obvious. And she made a choice that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with the exhausting, impossible calculation of how much resistance she could afford before it stopped being called professionalism and started being called difficult. "Where are we going?" she asked. The older man's expression didn't change. Upstairs. No elaboration. No reassurance. Just the certainty that she would follow because refusing wasn't actually an option they were offering her. Sanda felt something shift inside her chest. Not panic. Not submission. Something colder and more dangerous. The quiet awareness that she had just crossed a line she hadn't seen coming, and that whatever happened next would not be a compliance audit. She adjusted her grip on her portfolio. Lifted her chin. Met the older man's eyes without blinking. Then let's go. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing a woman could do was exactly what powerful men expected. And sometimes the only way to survive was to walk into the trap with your eyes open and your spine straight and the absolute refusal to let them see you afraid. The men turned. Sanda followed. And somewhere above them, on a floor she couldn't name in a suite she'd never been invited to enter, Magee Martin watched her image move across his security monitors and decided that she was the most interesting thing to walk into his building in years. What happens when a woman who refuses to break meets a man who's never had to bend? If you want to see how this power struggle unfolds, hit that subscribe button now because this story is about to get dangerous. Magee Martin was not a man who noticed women by accident. He sat in his private office on the 38th floor of Martin Tower, 3 monitors glowing softly in the low light, each one cycling through feeds from the building's internal security system. Most nights, the surveillance was background noise. A habit formed from years of knowing that survival required seeing threats before they announced themselves. He watched money move through his legitimate businesses. Watched his people come and go. Watched the empty corridors and locked floors that separated his world from the one below. Tonight, he watched a woman standing alone on the 23rd floor. She had been there for 40 minutes. Magee had noticed her at 9:15 when she first stepped off the elevator, escorted by building security to a corridor that should have remained empty. He'd been about to call down, ask why someone had been cleared to that floor without his direct approval, when something stopped him. The way she stood. Most people, when left alone in unfamiliar spaces, revealed themselves within minutes. They paced. Checked their phones compulsively. Looked around with obvious discomfort or poorly concealed curiosity. They performed small acts of anxiety that told Magee everything he needed to know about how easily they could be managed. This woman did none of that. She stood near the center of the corridor with her shoulders back and her chin level, feet planted, hands resting lightly on the leather portfolio she carried. She checked her phone twice in 40 minutes. Both times with deliberate, economical movements. No nervous energy. No wasted motion. When she looked around, it wasn't with fear. It was assessment. Magee leaned forward slightly, studying her face on the monitor. She was beautiful in a way that didn't ask for validation. Strong features, dark skin, an expression of calm intelligence that made her look like she belonged in rooms far more important than the one she'd been left in. But it wasn't her beauty that held his attention. It was her stillness. The kind of stillness that came from discipline, not submission. From someone who had learned to stand in hostile spaces without shrinking. Who had been underestimated so often that she'd stopped trying to prove anything and simply existed with quiet, unyielding presence. Magee had built an empire on reading people. Knowing who would break and who wouldn't. Who would fold under pressure and who would sharpen into something dangerous when pushed. This woman wouldn't break. He watched her check her phone again at 9:51. Watched her straighten her posture and adjust her portfolio strap. Watched her refuse to pace or fidget or show a single sign of the discomfort she had to be feeling. And he realized she wasn't supposed to be on that floor at all. Someone had moved her there. Delayed her. Left her waiting in a corridor meant only for his inner circle, in a part of the building civilians never saw. Whether it was incompetence or intent, Magee didn't know yet. But the result was the same. She was here. Alone. In his space. He reached for his phone and pressed a single contact. Calder Voss answered on the first ring. "Bring her to me," Magee said. "Now." The two men moved with the kind of precision that made Sanda's instincts sharpen. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just absolutely certain of their purpose and her compliance. The older one led. Calder Voss, though Sanda didn't know his name yet. She would learn it later, along with everything else that came with entering Magee Martin's inner world. For now, he was just a man in an expensive suit with eyes that tracked threats the way predators tracked movement. They didn't speak as they walked. No small talk. No reassurance. Just the steady rhythm of footsteps on polished stone and the quiet awareness that Sanda was being escorted somewhere she hadn't agreed to go. She focused on details. The way they positioned themselves, one slightly ahead, one to her left. Not blocking her exactly, but making it clear that the path forward was the only path available. The way they moved past doors without glancing at them, knowing by memory which ones mattered and which didn't. The way the corridor seemed to narrow the deeper they went, as if the building itself was closing around them. They stopped at an elevator Sanda hadn't noticed before. No call button. No floor indicator. Just seamless steel doors set into the wall like an afterthought. Calder pulled a keycard from inside his jacket and held it against a panel that looked like part of the wall. The doors opened silently. The elevator interior was small, intimate, and expensively minimal. Dark wood paneling. Recessed lighting. No mirrors. No emergency phone. No floor buttons except 3, each one requiring a separate keycard authorization. Calder stepped in first. The younger man gestured for Sanda to follow, then entered behind her. The doors closed with a soft hydraulic hiss that sounded too final. Calder pressed his keycard to the panel and touched the highest button. The elevator rose with barely perceptible motion, smooth and controlled, the kind of engineering that cost more than most people earned in a year. Sanda watched the numbers climb on the small digital display above the door. 23. 27. 31. They passed floors without stopping, moving through restricted space with the access that came from being trusted or feared or both. She could feel the younger man's attention on her. Not hostile. Assessing. Waiting to see if she would panic or demand answers or do something that required management. Sanda did nothing. She stood with her portfolio held loosely in both hands, her breathing even, her expression calm. She'd learned long ago that showing fear in front of men like this was an invitation. But showing too much confidence could be mistaken for challenge. The balance was narrow. Exist without submission. Stand without provocation. The elevator stopped at 38. The doors opened onto a private vestibule that looked nothing like the rest of the building. Here, the industrial minimalism gave way to something darker and more personal. Hardwood floors. Walls paneled in deep charcoal. Lighting so subtle it seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. A single door stood at the end of the short hallway. Heavy. Solid. The kind of door that locked from the inside and didn't open unless someone wanted it to. Calder walked to the door and knocked twice. A pause. Then a voice from inside, low and controlled. Come in. Calder opened the door and stepped aside. Sanda stood at the threshold, looking into a room she had not been invited to enter, knowing that crossing it would change everything, and understanding with absolute clarity that she had stopped having choices the moment she'd followed two strangers into a private elevator. She stepped inside. The suite was not what Sanda expected. No ostentatious displays of wealth. No art chosen to intimidate. Just a large room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River, dark furniture arranged with deliberate spacing, and lighting designed to create shadows rather than eliminate them. It felt like a place where decisions were made quietly and enforced absolutely. Magee Martin stood near the windows with his back to her, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city below. He didn't turn when she entered. Didn't acknowledge her presence immediately. Just let her stand there, taking in the room, understanding where she was and who controlled it. Sanda refused to fill the silence. She'd learned that waiting without discomfort was a power move of its own. After a long moment, Magee turned. He was taller than she'd expected. Broader through the shoulders. But what struck her immediately was his stillness. The same quality she possessed, but weaponized differently. Where her composure was defensive, his was absolute. The stillness of a man who had never needed permission for anything and wouldn't know how to ask for it if he did. His eyes found hers. Steel gray. Assessing without apology. Ms. Robinson. His voice was low, controlled, with the faint rasp of someone who spoke rarely and expected to be heard when he did. Thank you for joining me. The phrasing was polite. The tone made it clear gratitude had nothing to do with it. Sanda met his gaze without flinching. I wasn't aware I had a choice. A slight shift in his expression. Not quite a smile. Something closer to approval. You didn't, Magee said. But you came anyway. That tells me something. It tells you I'm practical. It tells me you're smart enough to know when resistance costs more than compliance. Sanda's jaw tightened slightly. Is that what this is? Compliance? That depends. Magee moved away from the windows, closing the distance between them with measured steps. Not threatening. Just deliberate. On whether you understand why you're here. I was told I'm here for a compliance audit. You were. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the controlled tension in his posture. But that's not why you're in this room. Sanda's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. Then why am I? Magee studied her for a long moment. Not the way men usually looked at her. Not with desire or dismissal. With something more unsettling. Recognition. Because I watched you stand in that corridor for 40 minutes, he said quietly, and you didn't break. Didn't pace. Didn't perform anxiety or deference or any of the things people do when they're trying to prove they belong somewhere they don't. Maybe I knew someone was watching. You didn't. His certainty was absolute. You were alone. You thought you'd been forgotten. And you stood there anyway. Like you'd rather wait in silence than ask permission to leave. Sanda felt something cold settle in her chest. He'd been studying her. Analyzing her. Deciding things about her without her knowledge or consent. That's invasive, she said. It's accurate. It's both. Magee's expression shifted again. That same flicker of something that might have been respect. You're not afraid of me. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He tilted his head slightly. But you're here. You're standing in my private suite at 10 o'clock at night with 2 of my men outside that door. And you're arguing with me instead of performing whatever version of yourself you think I want to see. Sanda held his gaze. What do you want to see? Magee was quiet for a moment. Then he answered with a truth that felt more dangerous than any threat. Exactly what I'm looking at. Sanda didn't move. Didn't let his words settle the way he intended them to. She'd spent too many years in rooms with powerful men who mistook their interest for compliments and her professionalism for availability. That's not an answer, she said. Magee's expression remained neutral, but something in his posture shifted. A slight relaxation, as if her refusal to be charmed had confirmed something he'd been testing for. You're right, he said. It's not. He moved to a bar cart near the far wall, poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if she wanted one, and carried both back. He extended one toward her. Sanda looked at the glass but didn't take it. I don't drink with people who haven't told me why I'm here. Magee held the glass steady between them. You were left in a restricted corridor for over 40 minutes because someone in my building made a mistake. Or a deliberate choice. I haven't determined which yet. And you brought me here to apologize? I brought you here because I don't believe in accidents. He lowered the glass to the table beside them when she still didn't take it. Your audit was scheduled for the 3rd floor. Public-facing offices. The kind of space where consultants come and go without clearance. Instead, you were sent to the 23rd floor. My floor. Where access requires authorization I didn't give. Sanda processed that. You think someone put me there intentionally. I think someone wanted to see what I'd do when I noticed you. Magee's eyes stayed locked on hers. Or they wanted to see what you'd do when you realized where you were. And what did I do? You stood there like you owned the space. His voice carried no judgment. Just observation. That takes either arrogance or survival instinct. You don't strike me as arrogant. Sanda felt the weight of his assessment. The way he stripped away performance and pretense and looked at the structure underneath. It was invasive and uncomfortable and far too accurate. So what happens now? She asked. Now you finish your audit, Magee said. But not the way it was designed. I'm assigning you directly to my operations. You'll have full access to the financial records you were hired to review. You'll report to me. No intermediaries. No subcontractors filtering your findings. Sanda's eyes narrowed. Why? Because if someone inside my organization is playing games, I want to know who. And because you're here to find irregularities. I'd rather you find them for me than against me. You're asking me to work for you. I'm offering you transparency. Magee's tone didn't change. You can complete your contract under the original terms, with limited access and managed results. Or you can do the job you were actually hired to do. Your choice. It wasn't a choice. Not really. But the fact that he framed it as one told Sanda something important. He understood leverage. Understood that forcing her compliance would get him obedience but not honesty. She wanted to say no. Wanted to walk out and file a report and let someone else navigate whatever power struggle was happening inside Martin Tower. But she also wanted the truth. Wanted to know what she'd been pulled into. And wanted to prove that she could stand in a room with a man like Magee Martin and not disappear. I'll need terms in writing, Sanda said. Magee almost smiled. You'll have them by morning. Sanda spent the next 3 days inside Martin Tower's financial architecture, and what she found was both meticulous and deliberate. On the surface, everything was clean. Real estate acquisitions documented with proper deeds and title transfers. Shipping logistics tracked through legitimate freight companies with customs declarations and tax filings that matched federal requirements. Private equity investments structured through holding companies with board minutes and quarterly audits. But beneath the compliance, there were patterns. Sanda sat in a conference room on the 35th floor with spreadsheets projected across 3 monitors, tracing cash flows through subsidiaries that existed only on paper. Shell companies registered in Delaware with addresses that led to law firms. Consulting fees paid to entities with no employees and no services rendered. Wire transfers moving between accounts in amounts just below federal reporting thresholds. None of it was illegal on its own. That was the brilliance of it. Every transaction had documentation. Every payment had an invoice. But when she mapped the network, when she connected the subsidiaries to their parent companies and tracked the money backward, she saw the structure. Magee Martin's empire wasn't built on crime. It was built on the space between legality and legitimacy, where everything was technically permissible but nothing was clean. She knew what she was looking at. Money laundering disguised as business operations. Revenue from sources that couldn't be named flowing through companies that existed to absorb and legitimize it. A criminal infrastructure hidden inside a corporate framework so well constructed that proving it would require warrants she didn't have and access she'd never get. The question wasn't whether Magee was running an illegal operation. The question was whether he knew she'd figured it out. On the 4th morning, Magee appeared in the conference room doorway. He didn't knock. Just stood there watching her work, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. Sanda looked up from her monitors but didn't stop what she was doing. I need access to the offshore accounts listed under Meridian Holdings. Why? Because the consulting payments don't reconcile with the services documented in your contracts. Either your accountants are incompetent or the fees are covering something else. Magee's expression didn't change. And you think I'll just give you access to offshore accounts? I think you told me you wanted transparency. Sanda held his gaze. Or was that only when the answers didn't cost you anything? A long silence stretched between them. Magee stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The click of the latch felt louder than it should have. What do you think you found? He asked quietly. I think you already know. Tell me anyway. Sanda leaned back in her chair, watching him carefully. This was the moment. The place where honesty either built trust or ended her access. I think your legitimate businesses are real, she said. But they're not the point. They exist to process money from sources you can't claim. I think you've built a laundering operation so sophisticated that even a full audit would struggle to prove intent. And I think you brought me here because you wanted to see if I was smart enough to figure that out. Magee was quiet for a long time. Then he moved closer, stopping at the edge of the conference table. And now that you have, he said, what are you going to do about it? Sanda met his eyes without hesitation. That depends on what you do next. Sanda just called out a Mafia boss to his face and lived to tell about it. But knowing the truth is one thing. Surviving it is another. If you need to see what happens next, smash that subscribe button because the danger is just beginning. The first sign came on a Tuesday afternoon when Sanda left Martin Tower for lunch. She'd been working inside the building for 6 days straight, barely leaving except to sleep. The routine had become familiar. Morning security check. Elevator to the 35th floor. Hours buried in financial records. Brief conversations with Magee that felt more like negotiations than meetings. Then back to her apartment after dark. But today she needed air. Needed distance from the screens and the numbers and the growing awareness that she was documenting a criminal empire while sitting inside it. She walked 3 blocks to a cafe she'd found during her first week in Chicago, ordered coffee, and sat by the window with her laptop. Normal. Ordinary. The kind of thing consultants did every day. Except the man at the counter kept looking at her. Not casually. Not with the vague interest strangers sometimes showed. With focus. With the kind of attention that cataloged details and stored them for later use. Sanda closed her laptop. Finished her coffee without hurrying. Left cash on the table and walked back toward Martin Tower, taking a different route than she'd come. The man didn't follow. But when she glanced back at the intersection, she saw him on his phone, watching her go. That night, her apartment building's front door was unlocked when she came home. Not broken. Not forced. Just open. As if someone had been given a key or knew how to pick the lock without leaving evidence. Sanda stood in the hallway for a long moment, weighing options. Call the police and explain what? That a door was unlocked and a stranger had looked at her? That she had a feeling something was wrong? She went inside. Checked every room. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed. But her laptop, which she'd left closed on her desk, was open. And the files she'd been reviewing, encrypted and password protected, had been accessed. Someone had been in her apartment. Someone who knew what they were looking for. Sanda called Magee. He answered on the first ring. What happened? Not a question. A command. She told him. The man at the cafe. The unlocked door. The accessed files. Her voice stayed level, professional, but her hands were shaking. Stay there, Magee said. Don't leave. Don't open the door for anyone. I'm sending Calder. Magee, what is this? A pause. Then his voice, quieter and more dangerous than she'd ever heard it. It's someone testing whether you matter to me. The line went dead. 15 minutes later, Calder arrived with 2 other men. They swept her apartment with equipment she didn't recognize, found cameras in her bedroom and living room, and removed them without speaking. Calder looked at her with something close to sympathy. Pack a bag. You're not staying here. Where am I going? Somewhere they can't reach you. Sanda's chest tightened. Who are they? Calder's expression hardened. People who think hurting you will hurt him. An hour later, Sanda was back inside Martin Tower, standing in Magee's private suite with a suitcase and the sudden, terrible understanding that she'd become leverage in a war she hadn't known existed. Magee stood by the windows, his back to her, tension radiating from every line of his body. You should have told me this could happen, Sanda said. Magee turned. His eyes were cold and furious and something else she couldn't name. I didn't think they'd move this fast. Sanda set her suitcase down and turned to face him fully. You don't get to be angry, she said. Magee's eyes snapped to hers. Excuse me? You heard me. Sanda's voice was steady, but something fierce had ignited beneath it. You don't get to stand there looking furious like this is something that happened to you. You did this. You brought me into your world. You gave me access to your records. You made me visible to whoever's watching you. And you didn't tell me what that would cost. I'm protecting you. Now. You're protecting me now. After someone broke into my home. After they watched me sleep. After they made it clear that I'm not a consultant anymore, I'm a target. She took a step closer. You should have warned me before that happened. Magee's jaw tightened. If I'd told you what you were walking into, you would have left. Yes. I would have. Because that would have been my choice to make. Sanda's hands curled into fists at her sides. But you didn't give me that choice. You gave me access and transparency and the illusion of control while knowing exactly what you were making me part of. I gave you the truth about my business. You gave me numbers. You didn't give me context. You didn't tell me that working for you would paint a target on my back. You didn't tell me that people are watching. You didn't tell me that your enemies would come for me to get to you. Her voice sharpened. You treated me like an asset instead of a person. Magee was silent. The kind of silence that felt like acknowledgement. So here's what's going to happen, Sanda continued. You're going to tell me everything. Not the sanitized version. Not the parts you think I can handle. Everything. Who your enemies are. What they want. Why I'm leverage. And what you're willing to do to keep me safe. Sanda. I'm not finished. She held his gaze with steel in her own. And then you're going to give me a real choice. Not the version where you frame compliance as agency. A real choice. I can leave. Right now. Tonight. You let me walk out of this building and you make sure no one follows me. You bury whatever trail connects me to you and you let me disappear. Or. His voice was quiet. Or I stay. But not as someone you protect. As someone you trust. With full transparency. Full autonomy. And full understanding of what I'm choosing. Magee moved closer. Close enough that she could see the war happening behind his eyes. Control versus honesty. Power versus vulnerability. If you stay, he said slowly, you'll see things you can't unsee. You'll know things that make you complicit. And you'll be in danger that doesn't end just because the immediate threat does. I know. You'll be choosing a life that doesn't have clean exits. I know that too. Sanda's voice didn't waver. But I'd rather choose it with my eyes open than wake up one day and realize I never had a choice at all. Magee studied her face. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He stepped back. Gave her space. And started talking. Magee made the call at 3 a.m. Sanda was awake in the guest room adjacent to his suite, unable to sleep, when she heard his voice through the walls. Low and controlled, but with an edge that suggested finality. She didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. He was dismantling something. Cutting ties. Burning bridges that couldn't be rebuilt. 20 minutes later, he appeared in her doorway. His jacket was off. His tie was gone. He looked like a man who'd just committed to a course of action that would cost him everything. It's done, he said. Sanda sat up. What's done? The alliance with Constantine's organization. I severed it. Publicly. In a way that can't be walked back. Her chest tightened. Magee, what did you do? What I should have done the moment they touched you. His voice was flat. Constantine's people broke into your apartment. They've been tracking you for days. Testing boundaries. Seeing how far they could push before I reacted. He paused. So I gave them their answer. Sanda stood, crossing to where he stood. What does that mean? It means I told Constantine that you're off limits. That anyone who comes near you answers to me directly. And that I'm pulling out of the trafficking routes we've been running through his territory for the last 6 years. The weight of that settled over her. Trafficking routes. 6 years. The scope of what he'd just sacrificed for her safety was staggering. That's half your operation, she said quietly. It's more than half. It's the foundation. Magee's eyes were hard. But it needed to end anyway. And now it has. Before Sanda could respond, Magee's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His expression darkened. It's Calder. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, and his entire body went rigid. When? A pause. How many? Another pause, longer this time. Lock it down. No one moves until I get there. He ended the call and looked at Sanda with something close to apology. What happened? She asked. Jasper Cole just tried to kill Calder in the parking garage. He's been feeding information to Constantine for 8 months. He knew I'd cut ties tonight. This was his move. Betrayal. Internal and immediate. The cost of Magee's decision manifesting in violence from someone he'd trusted. Is Calder alive? Yes. Jasper isn't. Sanda's breath caught. Death. Right here. Right now. Because Magee had chosen her safety over loyalty to people who'd been with him for years. Magee moved toward the door, then stopped. Turned back to her. I need you to stay here. Ilara's coming up. She'll stay with you until this is contained. Magee. He looked at her. I didn't ask you to do this, Sanda said. I know. His voice was quiet. Raw. But I did it anyway. He left before she could respond. And Sanda stood alone in a room inside a building that was eating itself from the inside, knowing that she'd become the reason a man's empire was collapsing, and that there was no way to undo what had already been set in motion. Outside, the city continued. Inside Martin Tower, everything was falling apart. Magee just burned his empire to the ground for a woman he barely knows. But destruction is easy. Building something real? That's the hard part. Subscribe to see if two people this damaged can actually choose each other without destroying themselves. The sun rose over Chicago 3 days later, and Martin Tower was still standing. Sanda watched from the windows of Magee's suite as the city woke below. The river reflected pale morning light. Traffic moved across bridges. People went to work in buildings that had no idea what had happened inside this one. Behind her, Magee sat at his desk reviewing contracts with Alara. His voice was steady, methodical, but there was a weariness in it that hadn't been there before. The cost of betrayal. The weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. Jasper Cole was dead. 2 other members of Magee's inner circle had been arrested after Calder's team uncovered evidence of their involvement with Constantine's organization. The trafficking routes were gone. The alliances were severed. And what remained of Magee's empire was smaller, leaner, and more exposed than it had been in a decade. Alara left an hour later with files under her arm and instructions to begin restructuring the legitimate holdings. When the door closed, Magee stood and crossed to where Sanda waited. "You've been quiet," he said. "I've been thinking." "About leaving?" Sanda turned to face him. "About staying." Something shifted in his expression. Hope, maybe. Or fear of it. "On what terms?" he asked. "Mine." Her voice was clear. "Certain. I'm not your employee. I'm not your consultant. I'm not someone you protect because protecting me protects your interests." "Then what are you?" "Your partner. If you'll have me." She held his gaze. "But partnership means equal access to decisions that affect us both. It means transparency even when it's uncomfortable. It means you don't make choices about my safety without asking me first." Magee was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I can do that." "Can you?" Sanda stepped closer. "Because everything in you is built on control. On knowing the variables and managing the outcomes. I'm asking you to give that up. With me. Not because you're weak, but because real partnership requires it." "I know." His voice was rough. "I'm not good at this." "Neither am I." A faint smile touched her lips. "But I'd rather figure it out with someone who's honest about the cost than someone who pretends there isn't one." Magee reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. When she didn't, his hand found hers. The touch was careful. Uncertain. Nothing like the control he wielded everywhere else. "I'm rebuilding," he said. "Smaller operations. Fewer people. More accountability. It's going to take years." "I know. And you want to be here for that?" Sanda squeezed his hand. "I want to build something that doesn't require us to become people we're not. You're never going to be safe. I'm never going to stop asking hard questions. But maybe that's the point." Magee pulled her closer. "Not possessive. Not desperate. Just steady." "Then stay," he said quietly. "Not because you have to. Because you choose to." Sanda leaned into him, feeling the tension leave his body as she did. "I choose this," she said. "I choose you. On my terms. With my eyes open." Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Inside Martin Tower, 2 people who had nearly destroyed each other began the slow work of building something neither of them had believed possible. A partnership built on truth instead of power. A future chosen freely instead of survived.